And I thought that was very good and fits into our topic today. In reflecting on the 1900 storm, we become aware that this small island, which frames our experience and nurtures our livelihood, is built upon an ordeal, a trial so terrible that it is difficult to comprehend. Yet, though we inhabit this side of a heartbreaking tragedy, this fragile strip of land, like the fragility of life, is also a setting for a miracle of endurance, courage, and determination that staggers the mind. For it's not only the dead that we honor in recounting, the story of the tragedy, but also the survivors, most of whom lost family members, friends, dreams, and hopes in a terrible manner. And yet, despite unimaginable grief and hardship, rebuilt our city. Can we ever understand how ordinary human beings manage this incredible feat of endurance? I can think of no better way to bridge this gap of time and culture than to re-enter their world and recreate their experience in their own words. Galveston residents of 1900 had much to look forward to, facing the new year with optimism and a belief in the future. A financial panic in 1893 had proved to be short-lived, and Galveston was experiencing a boom. In what has been called the first high-tech revolution, new technologies such as the telegraph and telephone made the world smaller and made rapid worldwide communication a reality. Inhabiting the largest and most prosperous port on the Western Gulf, the residents of Galveston entered the year 1900 with profound confidence. Calling the passing century the miracle century and praising the enormous progress of 100 years, the newspaper on that New Year's Day 1900 observed that in contrast to 1900, people at the beginning of the 19th century had no railroads, no telegraphs, were ignorant of the sewing machine, and had no conception of the telephone. A pitiful lot was the citizen of 1800, the newspaper alleged. Moreover, an article on that day's paper observed that the development of X-rays, the microbe theory, and anesthesia were producing a revolution in medicine, calling the advances victory snatched from the hidden entrenchments of death. Faith in continued progress was assumed, as the newspaper that morning speculated. Still, we cannot tell, and this is January 1st, 1900. We may yet learn to see by phone with a glass eye, to work while we sleep, to fly from city to city, to soar the ocean over. And I think that's a pretty amazing prophecy for someone in 1900 to even foresee that. Some, however, celebrated the occasion on a more sober note. A solemn high mass was held at midnight at Sacred Heart Church, accompanied by Ave Maria and Gloria in Excelsis Deo. As the Daily News uncannily remarked, it was with great regret that the congregation saw the close of an event that was of rare occurrence and perhaps would never again be witnessed by the present-day congregation. The advent of summer 1900 brought none of the fanfare now associated with the start of the hurricane season. Even when a Gulf storm in July washed out the foundation of a house at 8th and Avenue K, the newspaper's caustic observation was, there's little protection from the Gulf in that neighborhood. Along with some grumbling about poor drainage that contributed to ground level flooding of businesses along the Strand. I think we still hear that. By the time Isaac Klein had hoisted hurricane warning flags on Friday, September 7th, most long-term residents already knew a dropping barometer and rising tide were sure signs of approaching foul weather. What they could not know was how serious the impending blow would be. Residents would have found little to raise their anxiety in the morning's paper on Saturday, September 8th. The only mentions of a Gulf storm were back page items about hurricane damage along the Florida coast and a note about the local storm warnings, coupled with the speculation that the tropical disturbance may have changed its course or spent its force before reaching Texas. The weather forecast for that day called for rain and strong northerly winds. Ida Smith Austin, sister-in-law of Reverend Henry Austin, recalled, quote, "A storm had been predicted for Friday night, September 7th, but so little impression did it make on my mind that a most beautiful and well-attended moonlight gathering was given at our home that evening. Everyone remarked on the beauty of that night." Looking at that Saturday's paper, we see the usual concerns of an ordinary day. One item reminded folks that Saturday was trash pickup day for the Eastern District of town. Star Clothing House at 2405 Market Street announced a half-price sale, while another clothing store advertised that $1.25 negligee shirts were reduced to 85 cents. An interview covered the controversy over what paving materials should be used for planned street improvements in the business district, considering the island's sandy base. Indeed, most items portrayed a routine weekend for Galveston residents. The county commissioners were scheduled to meet at 10 a.m. A hoo-hoo meeting was planned at the Redman's Hall on Market and 21st, with, quote, "all members invited to congregate at Room 9 Tremont Hotel promptly at 8:30 p.m. to enjoy a trolley car excursion about the city." The local Democratic Campaign Committee announced its plans to open the fall campaign on September 17th. And the Daily News excitedly announced that the farce comedy Kelly Kids would open on September 11th. Also that Saturday's Daily News noted that Reverend R.H. Mason of the Fourth Presbyterian Church on Winnie would preach on the superlative significance of life at Sunday morning service. The superlative significance of life. How poignant, how timely. The sermon never delivered. What was he planning to say? It's impossible to look at the personals in that morning's newspaper without wondering what tragedies, what miracles, what personal and family dramas lay behind the seemingly trivial announcements, the superlative significance of life. Dr. Fred K. Fisher and his wife had just returned from a 2-month tour of Canada. Reverend W.M. Scott and his family had returned from Virginia, and he would be conducting Sunday services again. Louis Becker, son of Mr. and Mrs. Becker, left Friday for school in Carthage, Missouri. Mrs. J.B. Polnard and her son left on Thursday for Monterrey, Mexico. And W.L. Norwood, accompanied by his wife and daughter, left for Buffalo on Friday night to attend the annual convention of the National Association of Undertakers and Embalmers. But even under the best of circumstances, life seldom goes as planned, and these were not the best of circumstances. It took a while, however, for people to comprehend how dire the situation was. Cora Bacon, writing in the Daily News 1 year after the storm, described how conditions quickly deteriorated after sunrise. The north wind had increased to a gale. Ominous clouds were scurrying southward. We felt the storm in the air. The tide had risen in places over the bank that protected that portion of this island, and a tiny stream of salt water stole towards the south on 7th Street. With perhaps a thought of flight to Houston, I went into the city to the foot of Tremont Street. There, in clouds of blinding dust, supporting myself by holding against an awning post, I looked aghast at the damage being done to small craft in the basin and watched the waves breaking over the wharves. I had no further thought of venturing over the bay that day. Turning, I took a trolley car for the beach. I found the circuit abandoned and could only ride to Avenue Q. The tide had been over the street, but at 9 a.m. the water was not unusually high, though the streets were very wet. The beach presented a busy scene. Little shops, restaurants, and bathhouses were in removal to the hotel lawn and other supposed safe localities. Crowds of sightseers gathered at the sea and 21st Street to watch the furious assault of breakers that were running high. Occasionally, there was a vicious little spit of rain mingled with the stormy sunshine. Curiosity soon gave rise to fear and ultimately to some a quiet resignation. Among those, a young woman at John Seeley Hospital recounts how she imagined the hospital as a shaky old boat at sea and later lamented, "The darkness is overwhelming us to add to the horror." While a traveling salesman stranded at a hotel wrote to his wife describing fellow refugees huddling in the hallways in the dark as the roof blew off and the windows shattered in the storm. The next morning, he recounted, "The most horrible sights you can ever imagine, with dead bodies lying here and there and houses blown into pieces." Overcome with emotion, he concludes with sorrow for the victims and a renewed appreciation of his loved ones. "How did I feel for them? And thank God for the goodness he has shown unto my little family, and how I love my little family." The superlative significance of life. In the wake of the storm, at least 6,000 Galvestonians perished in the city. The death toll is still uncertain, along with several thousand further west on the island and on the mainland. A zone of near total damage extended from the Gulf Shore to Broadway, where debris piled up to such a height that many living north of Broadway were spared complete destruction. Even churches, many of them solid structures, were not spared from the fury of the wind and lashing storm surge. Of the more than 30 church buildings in the city, only a few escaped major damage or total destruction. The Broadway Memorial Presbyterian Church was off its foundation and badly twisted, and the St. Paul German Presbyterian Church was wrecked beyond repair. Reverend Henry Austin of the Broadway Memorial Presbyterian Church lost his house, but he and his family managed to escape to a safer location. In the wake of the storm, Reverend William Scott of the First Presbyterian Church counted at least 22 deaths in his congregation. Attendance at Sunday school dropped from 115 pupils to 56 following the disaster. So how did Galvestonians go on in the face of all this desolation and loss? Not only go on, but actually make a contribution to those who came later. How did they not succumb completely to despair? I'm not sure that even they could tell us or that we could comprehend without having been there ourselves. Perhaps some found some meaning in rebuilding, in the determination to restore as much as humanly possible that which was lost. Others found meaning in the construction of the seawall, finding the way to make the island safer for those family members and friends who remained. But can we ever grasp the pain of that leap from there to here, from that ghastly morning of Sunday, September 10th, 1900, to the Galveston of today? Again, perhaps only those who were there will know. An editorial in the Galveston Daily News on January 1st, 1901, expresses this for us in a profoundly touching New Year's greeting. Wishing a kind and generous world a happy new century, Galveston plunges into a new era of great promise, filled with life, hope, and purpose. Sorely stricken, terribly devastated, but a few months ago, Galveston has, by the exertion of her people, supported by the sympathy and substantial assistance of the world, risen to her feet, and though bearing the scars of the ordeal through which she passed, has resumed her place in the phalanx of progress. Cherishing the memory of those 6,000 dead, dear members of family, loved ones, and neighbors, ever fondly holding them in our thoughts, we say, may they rest in peace. And how good it seems to live. The harrowing sights, the personal hardships, the difficulties piled mountain high, all seem as nothing. Looking back over what has been accomplished in 4 short months, the people feel encouraged to meet the difficulties which await them, assured they are of the continuing sympathy and goodwill of humanity. To have labored as they have done at gruesome and seemingly impossible tasks, and to be able to perform them successfully is something not to be regretted, but rather esteemed a privilege. And to go forward in this work, facing still other difficulties and weighed with large responsibilities, seem a privilege. Difficulties, present possibilities for great achievements, present present possibilities for great achievements. And from the depths, Galveston is struggling to her former position and learning of strengths that will carry her to loftier heights. Shortly after the storm, Rabbi Henry Cohen took charge of relief work, forming a central relief committee. Writing of the collaborative efforts in the wake of the storm, Reverend Henry Austin, sounding almost like a Unitarian, observed that with delight we point to the intimations of that grandest time when there shall be neither Jew nor Christian, Protestant nor Catholic, divided by narrow lines of sect or creed. The cordiality with which ministers of supposed opposing faiths had labored is like a ray from heaven's glory. The superlative significance of life. A sermon never delivered, but perhaps lived and still alive in our hearts.
Great thoughts. Thank you, Stan. The closing hymn will now be sung. If you all would stand as you're willing and able. You have the insert of the words